Welcome back to Sci-Fi Travelers, friends. I'm back with another adventure-filled story, so fasten your cameras and enjoy the narrative. Happy viewing. The alien queen's child ran up to a human man, calling him Dad, and the entire palace was shocked. Theodore had been in exactly 3 situations in his life where standing perfectly still seemed like the only sensible option. Once inside the blast radius of a leaking fuel cell, once in front of a customs officer who did not believe his cargo was decorative rocks. And now, the throne hall of Etherhold did not help matters. It was the kind of room that made a man suddenly aware of his own posture, his own hands, the specific and embarrassing sound of his own breathing. Everything was crystal. The vaulted ceiling arched overhead like the inside of a frozen wave, and light came from nowhere and everywhere at once, breaking apart across 100 courtiers dressed in silver and pale gold. They were beautiful, all of them, in that faintly unnerving Valoran way, entirely human to look at, right up until you noticed the ears, which tapered to graceful points, as though evolution had glanced at the species and decided they should look permanently, gently amused by you. Theodore was not beautiful. Theodore was a salvage pilot with engine grease under 3 fingernails, and a jacket that had survived 2 decompressions and 1 memorable bar fight. And he was standing in a palace that floated a full kilometer above an alien sea for reasons that had been explained to him twice, and which he still did not entirely believe. "You will stand there," the protocol officer had told him that morning in the tone of a man reading a hostage his rights. "You will say nothing. You will touch nothing, and above all, you will draw no attention." 2 out of 3, Theodore had figured. Not bad odds, historically speaking. Then the golden doors at the far end of the hall crashed open. A child came through them at a dead sprint. Small, fast, and aimed. The way a comet is aimed, with a single-minded velocity that suggested the laws of the room, did not apply to her. She had a wild, dark tangle of hair and the delicate points of Valoran ears, and she cut across that vast mirrored floor as if it were her own kitchen, dodging a startled noblewoman, ducking under an outraged chamberlain's reaching hand. And she did not slow down, not even a little, until she collided with Theodore's leg and clamped on with the grip of a docking clamp closing on a hull. "Dad," she shouted, muffled against his knee. "Dad, they made me wear the itchy one again." The silence that followed was total. It was the silence of 100 people forgetting in unison how lungs worked. Somewhere near the wall, a courtier's crystal goblet stopped halfway to his mouth and simply stayed there, as if he too had been switched off. Even the light seemed to hold still. Theodore looked down at the child attached to his leg. The child looked up at Theodore. And this was the part he would think about later in the quiet when he had time to be properly frightened. It was not the word that undid him. Anyone could shout a word. It was the eyes. Because looking down into that small, indignant, upturned face, Theodore was looking, with the horrible clarity of a man recognizing his own reflection in a shop window he'd walked past 1,000 times at his own eyes. Same odd gray. Same stubborn set. Eyes he shaved in front of every morning. "I think," Theodore said very carefully to the entire silent hall, "there may have been a filing error." Nobody laughed. He hadn't really expected them to. Along the walls, the palace guards, tall, silver-armored, and up to this moment ornamental as candlesticks, shifted their grips on their spears with a soft, coordinated hiss of metal that Theodore felt in his back teeth. Somewhere in the crowd, a whisper started, and then another, and the whispers began to move through the court like wind finding its way across water, gathering weight as they went. And on the high throne at the far end of the hall, beneath a canopy of hanging crystal that scattered the light into 1,000 slow-turning colors, the queen rose. She rose slowly. That was what Theodore noticed. Not the startled way everyone else in the room had moved, all jolt and reflex, but slowly, the way a person stands when they have been braced for a blow for a very long time, and it has finally at last arrived. Queen Elena. He knew her name. Everyone had made very sure he knew her name. She was tall and pale and lovely in a way that had nothing to do with the crown, human in every line of her, but for the fine points of her ears, and her face was composed into the flawless royal calm they must teach in whatever school produces queens. But her eyes betrayed her, wide and fixed on him and full, brimming full, of a secret she had clearly been carrying alone for years, and which had just, at a full sprint in an itchy dress, escaped her. "Nova," the queen said. Her voice did not shake, which was somehow worse. "Come away from him." The child tightened her grip on Theodore's leg and stuck out her jaw, and in that one small, mutinous gesture he saw, again, unmistakably himself. "No," said Nova, "I found him." "I found him," Nova repeated in the tone of someone who had located a lost pet and intended to keep it. "So he's mine now. That's the rule." "That is not the rule," said Elena, coming down the throne steps with the careful precision of a woman crossing a frozen lake she suspects is thinning. "It's a rule," said Nova. "It's my rule." Theodore, who had spent his entire adult life talking his way out of rooms exactly this dangerous, though admittedly with fewer spears and better ventilation, recognized a losing negotiation when he heard one. He crouched down slowly, so that the guards along the wall would not mistake bending his knees for anything more exciting, and found himself eye to eye with a 5-year-old who had his own face and none of his diplomatic caution. "Hey," he said quietly, "Nova, right? You know my name," she said, delighted, as though he'd performed a card trick. "Lucky guess." He was aware of the entire court leaning in around them like the walls of a canyon. He kept his voice for her alone. "Here's the thing. Everybody in this very fancy room is a little upset right now, and I'd love it if nobody stayed upset, on account of some of them are holding pointy things. So how about you let go of my leg just for a minute and go stand next to your mom, and I promise I won't disappear." Nova studied him with the ferocious skepticism of the very young. "Promise, promise." "Promise, promise," said Theodore, a man who had broken approximately 400 promises in his lifetime and felt, for the first time, that this one might actually be load-bearing. She let go. She marched to Elena's side with enormous dignity, took her mother's hand, and turned to glare at the assembled nobility as if daring them to comment. And Elena, Queen Elena, ruler of Etherhold, keeper of a secret that had just walked itself out of the vault on small determined legs, looked down at the top of her daughter's head, and then up at Theodore, and for one unguarded second her flawless composure simply wasn't there. She looked tired. She looked like someone at the end of a very long-held breath. "Clear the hall," she said. "It is a remarkable thing, watching 100 aristocrats pretend they are not desperate to stay." They filed out in a rustle of silk and offense, casting backward glances, and the whispers went with them. And Theodore had the distinct feeling of being the last item left on a table after a party, uncertain whether he would be cleaned up or thrown away. The great doors boomed shut. What remained was the queen, the child, 4 guards who had apparently graduated from ornamental to essential, and one salvage pilot whose morning had gone spectacularly off script. "You don't remember me," Elena said. It was not a question. She said it the way you'd say the sky was up there, an established fact, load-tested by grief. "I feel like I'd remember," Theodore said, and gestured vaguely at all of her, the crown, the throne, the floating palace, this. "You wouldn't, that's rather the point." She let go of Nova's hand and folded her own together, a small gesture of control. "How much did they explain when you came to Etherhold this time, about the severance?" Theodore's stomach did the thing it did right before a rough landing. "They said," he answered slowly, "that no outsider is allowed to leave with memories of this place. Security, something about the palace being hidden and staying that way. They said it wouldn't hurt." He paused. "They said a lot of things wouldn't hurt, actually, and most of them did. Every human who has ever set foot here," Elena said, "leaves with those memories removed, cleanly, painlessly. It is our oldest law, and it is how we have stayed a rumor instead of a target for 900 years. She looked at him, and something moved behind her eyes, something old and carefully filed away. You came here once before, Theodore. A long time ago. You washed up half-drowned on the eastern shore with a broken ship and a truly appalling attitude, and by our law you should have stayed a week and left remembering nothing. And did I? He asked, leave remembering nothing. You left, Elena said, remembering nothing. Her hand came to rest without her seeming to decide it on Nova's shoulder, but you did not leave nothing behind. The words landed in the great crystal room and rang there, quiet and enormous. Theodore looked at the child, at his own gray eyes, set in a small, stubborn face, watching him with the patient certainty of someone who had already made up her mind about him and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Ah, he said. It was, he felt, not his finest line, but it was, for once, the only honest one he had. Ah, Elena repeated. 900 years of hidden dynasty, a crown older than your entire species' written language, and the man responsible for the current crisis says ah. In fairness, said Theodore, I've had a very compressed introduction to the material. Nova, who had been following this exchange with the swiveling attention of someone watching a very slow game of catch, tugged her mother's sleeve. Is he staying for dinner? Nova, because he's holding his hands wrong, Nova announced, pointing at Theodore with the merciless honesty of the small. You hold them like this. She demonstrated, folding her hands into some precise Valoran arrangement of fingers that clearly meant something. Not like a person hanging off a rope. I am frequently hanging off a rope, Theodore admitted. Professionally, so that tracks. See, said Nova to her mother as though this settled everything. He needs help. He's mine to help. Elena closed her eyes briefly, and Theodore watched the queen and the mother war behind her face and the mother win. She waved the 4 guards back toward the walls, and they retreated to a distance that was theoretically respectful and practically still well within spear range. And she lowered herself onto the bottom step of the throne dais, as if her crown had abruptly gained weight. Sit, she told him. You look like you're about to either faint or run, and both would be undignified. He sat, a careful arm's length away, on cold crystal. Nova immediately installed herself in the gap between them, which he suspected was not an accident. Tell me about the shore, Theodore said quietly. The night I don't remember. I think I'd like to know it, even the part where I can't. And so Elena told him. Not as a queen delivering a briefing, but slowly, haltingly, the way you tell a story you've only ever told yourself in the dark. How a storm had thrown a battered human salvage ship against the eastern reefs, and how she had been walking the shore alone. A thing queens were not supposed to do, which was rather the appeal. When she'd found him face down in the surf, more drowned than not, cursing the sea in 3 languages even as he coughed it back up. How by every law she should have called the guard and had him quietly processed and severed and gone. How instead, for reasons she had never fully explained even to herself, she had not. You were, she said, and a reluctant thread of warmth crept into her voice, betraying her, extremely irritating. You argued with everything. You argued with the tides. You told me my palace was structurally optimistic. That does sound like me, Theodore said. You stayed a season. She turned a ring on her finger around and around. Longer than the law allowed, I kept finding reasons. The repairs were slow. The weather was poor. The council was distracted. A small, private smile. The council was not distracted. I lied to a 900-year-old institution because I did not want you to leave, and I had never in my life not wanted someone to leave. The crystal hall was very quiet. Somewhere far below, the sea moved against the pillars that held the whole impossible palace aloft. And then, he asked, and then it ended the way it had to end, Elena said, and the warmth folded itself carefully back out of sight. You could not stay. A human at court, remembering everything, it would have been a war before the season turned. So I let them take you to the departure hall. I let them do what the law required. I stood behind the glass and I watched them sever you, and I watched you forget me in real time, watched the season go out of your eyes like a light, and then I let you fly away thinking you'd washed up somewhere, drunk, and dreamed a woman with strange ears. She said it flatly, the way you report the weather when the weather has already taken the roof off your house. It was the correct decision. I have never once been at peace with it. Nova, in the gap between them, had gone unusually still. She was looking up at her mother with an expression too old for her small face, the look of a child who has caught, mid-sentence, the shape of something the adults thought they were saying over her head. "You cried," Nova said quietly, "when you told the picture of him good night. I saw once." Elena's composure did not so much crack as quietly set itself down and walk out of the room. "I told you," she said unsteadily, "to be asleep at that hour." "I was pretending," said Nova, with tremendous satisfaction, and leaned her whole small weight sideways against Theodore's arm as though he'd been a fixture in the room for years. As though the last 5 years had simply been an administrative delay in his arrival. And Theodore, who did not remember the shore, or the storm, or the season, or the woman with strange ears, who had lost all of it cleanly and painlessly, exactly as promised, exactly as the law required, sat very still on the cold, bright steps of a throne and felt, rising up through the hole where those memories should have been, something enormous and unignorable that no law had ever managed to remove. The moment, being a moment, did not survive contact with politics. The great doors did not boom this time. They opened smoothly, expensively, the way things open when someone has money and patience and wants you to know it. A man came through them alone, which took a certain kind of nerve in a hall that had just been cleared of everyone, and he crossed the mirrored floor at an unhurried stroll, hands folded in the correct Valoran arrangement, ears tapering to points beneath silver-shot hair, wearing a smile that had clearly been fitted by a professional. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing to precisely the depth that respect required and not 1 degree more. "Forgive the intrusion, but when a child announces the entire species question to a full court, one does feel the walls have already heard and the doors are somewhat academic." Elena was on her feet. Theodore hadn't seen her stand. She simply was standing, and the tired mother from the throne steps had been folded away and the queen unfolded in her place. "Lord Robert," she said, "you were not summoned." "No," Robert agreed pleasantly. "I so rarely am." He stopped at a courteous distance and turned the fitted smile on Theodore, examining him the way a man examines livestock he is deciding whether to buy or simply admire from over the fence. "So, this is the human, the stray." He said the word gently, which was worse than if he'd spat it. "I confess I expected something grander. You have the look of a man who has slept in his ship more nights than out of it." 40-40 split, Theodore said. "The ship's more comfortable if you can believe it." "Charming." Robert's eyes did not smile with the rest of his face. "Do you understand, stray, what you've done simply by existing where you're standing?" "No, of course you don't. Let me help." He spread his folded hands, a lecturer opening a lesson. "For 9 centuries this palace has survived by being a story humans tell each other and don't believe. A rumor, a ghost. And rumors do not get invaded, do not get colonized, do not get strip-mined by the human worlds the way every world that ever met your kind and got remembered has been. Our secrecy is not cruelty, stray. It is the only reason my people are still here to be cruel to you." "He talks like this a lot," Nova informed Theodore in a stage whisper that carried to the walls. "Everybody hides in the garden when he comes." A muscle moved in Robert's cheek. "And now," he continued, ignoring her with visible effort, "there is a child, a half-thing, living, breathing, walking proof that the crown broke its own oldest law, that Her Majesty kept a human, kept his memory of us in the most literal way possible." He let that sit. "Do you know what the council will do when they understand what that little girl is? Some will want her hidden deeper. Some will want the human quietly severed again and returned to the void he crawled out of. And some," the smile widened, "some will understand that a half-human heir is a magnificent instrument. Proof the 2 species can breed is proof they can bargain, or proof they can be made to. Wars have started over less, stray. Wars have ended over less. Everything depends on whose hand is on the child. Her name, said Theodore, and he was surprised to hear how level his own voice came out, is Nova, and you're not putting your hand on anything. Robert regarded him with something almost like appetite. You've been here an hour, he said softly, and you're already choosing sides in a game you can't see the board of. That's either very brave or very stupid. Little of both, historically, Theodore said. It's kind of my whole business model. Robert. Elena's voice cut across the hall, and it had the throne back in it now, all 900 years of it. You came to threaten me in my own hall through my daughter, and you did it smiling. I have tolerated a great deal from your faction. I will remember this one. Threaten. Robert pressed a hand to his chest, wounded to the depth of his tailoring. Majesty, I came to warn you. The council convenes in 3 days. I merely thought you'd prefer to hear the shape of your ruin from a friend. He bowed again, that same insolent millimeter of respect. I'll let you enjoy your reunion, such as it is. Do teach the stray to hold his hands. It's painful to watch. And he turned and strolled back the way he'd come, unhurried, a man who had said exactly what he'd come to say and knew every word of it had landed. The doors closed behind him. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Nova, with the pitiless clarity that Theodore was beginning to understand was simply her native language, looked up at both adults and said, Are we going to hide in the garden now? No, said Theodore, before Elena could answer. He was still looking at the closed doors, and something in his chest had gone quiet and cold and certain. The way it did in the half-second before a landing he was no longer sure he could walk away from. No, I don't think hiding's going to cut it anymore. He glanced at Elena. 3 days, that's not a lot of runway. It is not, Elena said grimly, any runway at all. They argued about it that night, quietly, in a smaller room with fewer echoes. After Nova had finally been persuaded to sleep by the tactical deployment of Theodore telling her a story about a salvage run gone wrong, which she had critiqued for realism throughout, and then fallen asleep in the middle of, mouth open, one hand fisted in his sleeve. There's a way, Theodore said when he came back. There has to be. You said the severance takes memories. Anything that takes can give back. Machines don't have opinions, they run in reverse if you ask them right. He'd spent his whole life talking to broken systems. This one was just bigger and had a throne room. Elena had gone very still by the window, where the sea moved a kilometer below in the dark. You're talking about restoration, she said. If that's the word for it. It's the word for it. She didn't turn around. It's also the word we use for a thing we don't do, Theodore. The severance is clean because it's shallow. It lifts a season off the top like skimming cream. Restoration goes down. It pushes years of a life back into a mind that has closed over the space where they used to be, all at once, no gentling. Now she turned, and her face in the low light was not a queen's. The last human we tried it on could not afterward remember which memories were his own and which the machine had put back. He couldn't tell the difference between what he'd lived and what he'd been told he lived. He wasn't hurt. He just stopped being sure he was anyone in particular. Great, said Theodore. Love those odds. There are no odds. That's what I'm telling you. There's a coin, and one side is you and one side is a stranger wearing your face, and the coin is weighted wrong. She crossed the room to him, urgent now, the composure gone entirely. I have spent 5 years missing a man who didn't know I existed. I have made my peace with a ghost. I will not trade the ghost for a worse one. Nova needs a father who knows who he is. Nova, Theodore said quietly, needs a father who knows who she is. He said it gently because it was the softest true thing he had. Elena. In 3 days, a very well-dressed man is going to stand up in front of your council and tell them a story about that little girl, who she is, what she's for. And the only person in this whole floating city who can stand up and tell a different story is me. And right now I'm astray with no memory and a bad attitude, and no one's going to believe a word out of my mouth, because there's a hole in me exactly the shape of the thing I'd be swearing to. He spread his hands wrong like a man hanging off a rope, and he knew it, and he didn't care. I don't want the season back to feel better. I want it back so that when I say she is mine and I chose this, and I'm not going anywhere, it's not a guess. It's a memory. Nobody argues with a man who remembers. The silence stretched. Below them the sea went on, not caring. You could lose yourself, Elena said. Her voice had dropped almost to nothing. I already did, said Theodore. 5 years ago, painlessly, exactly as promised. He almost smiled. At least this way I get a vote. The restoration hall was cold and white, and honest about what it was, which Theodore appreciated. He distrusted rooms that dressed up. They laid him back in a cradle of pale light, and Elena held one of his hands, and Nova, who had refused, with volcanic 5-year-old finality, to be left out, and whom no institution 900 years old had found any answer to, held the other, small fingers wrapped around 2 of his. If I come out of this weird, Theodore told her, you have to tell me I hold my hands wrong. That's how I'll know it's still me. You hold your hands wrong, Nova said solemnly, preemptively, just in case. Then the light came down. It did not hurt. Elena had been right about that and wrong about everything it meant. It was not pain, it was flood. It was 5 years of held-back water finding the crack all at once. The storm, the reef, the taste of the sea coming back up. A woman on a gray shore who told him his palace was structurally sound and his attitude was not. A season of arguing with the tides. 100 small mornings. The specific weight of her head against his shoulder. The exact moment he had known and been too much of a coward to say all of it. Roaring back into the room that had been sealed off inside him. Filling it. And Theodore made a sound he was not proud of and gripped both small and slender hands like a man going over a waterfall. And somewhere in the flood, he lost track of which way was up, which memories were his, whether the gray shore was something he'd lived or something he'd been handed. And then a voice, very close, very stubborn, entirely unimpressed. Dad, you're holding my hand wrong. The flood found its level. And Theodore, drenched to the soul in 5 years he had not known he was missing, opened his eyes, looked up into a small face with his own gray eyes in it, and said, in a voice that shook only a little, yeah, there you are. He remembered. He remembered her. He remembered choosing. And for the first time since a comet in an itchy dress had knocked him flat, Theodore knew exactly, precisely, load, bearingly who he was. The council chamber was built as a great ring, so that no one sat above anyone else. 900 years of Valoran government had decided the only safe place for a throne was inside a circle of people who could all see each other's faces. On the appointed morning that ring was full, silver and pale gold, ears pointed and attentive, and in the open center stood Elena, and beside her Theodore, and between them, holding a hand of each, Nova, who had been promised she could come only if she was quiet, a promise everyone in the room understood to be structurally optimistic. Robert rose first because men like Robert always rise first. He was magnificent. Theodore would give him that. He walked the inside of the ring and he told the story he'd come to tell, the broken law, the kept human, the half-thing air, and he told it beautifully, the way you'd narrate the slow approach of a storm. And Theodore watched the faces around the ring tighten one by one, and felt the room begin to tip. The crown, Robert concluded, spreading his folded hands to all of them, kept a human's memory of us alive. In the most literal, walking, breathing form. Ask yourselves what that is, my lords. Is it love? He let the word curdle. Or is it the first crack in 9 centuries of the only wall that ever kept us safe? I say we close the crack. Sever the stray, hide the child, and let Ethelhold go back to being a rumor before your sentiment gets us all remembered. He sat to a low sound of agreement, the dangerous kind, the kind that moves through a crowd like water finding the low ground. Then Theodore let go of Nova's hand and stepped into the center of the ring, and every point in that circle turned to him, and he understood he had exactly one landing and no runway. My name's Theodore, he said. 3 days ago that sentence would have been about all I could swear to, Because he's right, there was a hole in me right about here, exactly the shape of this place. Your law put it there, cleanly, painlessly. All the words your Lord likes. He turned slowly, meeting the ring one face at a time. So I did a stupid thing. I asked for it back, all of it, and they warned me I might come out the other side not knowing which memories were mine. He paused. I know which ones are mine, every one, and I'd like to tell you about the woman I met on a gray shore who told me my attitude was structurally unsound. And he did. Not the way Robert told a story beautifully from above. He told it the way you tell a thing you lived. The storm, the reef, a queen who broke her own oldest law because she didn't want him to leave and had never in her life not wanted someone to leave. A season of arguing with the tides. He told them the truth Robert had dressed as a threat and simply left it undressed and let them see it as it was. Your Lord says I'm a crack in the wall, Theodore said. Maybe. But here's the thing about that little girl he keeps calling a half thing. He looked at Nova, who was being quiet with the whole-body intensity of a child who has been told there is a reward. She's not proof your wall failed. She's proof of something you've been too scared to test in 900 years, that when a human and a Valoran actually meet, all the way, no memory wiping, no hiding, you don't get a war. You get her. His voice roughened. You've kept yourselves a rumor so no one could ever hurt you. And it worked. Congratulations. It also meant no one could ever know you. That's not a wall, my lords. That's a very beautiful cage, and you built it a kilometer up so you wouldn't notice the door was locked from the inside. Silence. Then Elena stepped in beside him, and she did not use the throne in her voice. She used her own. I broke the law, she said simply to her council. I will not pretend I didn't. I kept a season, and it kept me, and it gave me a daughter I would break the law 1,000 times over to keep. Lord Robert asks what that is. She took Theodore's hand, wrong, like a man hanging off a rope, and she folded his fingers gently into the correct Valoran arrangement and held them there. It's this. It's the first honest thing this palace has done in 900 years, and I am done hiding it. It was Nova, in the end, who broke Robert. She let go of her mother's hand, marched into the exact center of the great ring, planted herself in front of the most powerful people of her world, and announced, in a voice that carried to every seat, he tells the best stories, and he holds his hands wrong, and he's mine, I found him. She glared around the ring, daring 900 years of government to argue. That's the rule. And somewhere in that circle, an old counselor laughed, a real laugh, startled out of him. And then another, and the dangerous low water of the room simply broke apart, unable to hold its shape against one 5-year-old and the truth. Robert rose and saw it, and understood that a man cannot fight a thing the whole room has decided to love, and his fitted smile, for the first time, did not fit. He said nothing. There was nothing left that would land. He bowed his insolent millimeter, and this time it looked less like insolence and more like a man conceding the tide. They did not fix everything that day. Etherhold did not fling open its doors. 9 centuries of fear do not unlock in an afternoon. But the council voted, narrowly, grudgingly, historically, to let the crack in the wall stay open a little. To let one human keep his memories. To let one child be exactly what she was in the open, and see what the two worlds might build across a table instead of a battlefield. That evening, Theodore stood at a high window with Nova asleep against his shoulder and a queen against his side, watching the sea move a kilometer below in the last of the light. Structurally optimistic, he murmured, looking out at the impossible floating city. You're never going to stop saying that, said Elena. Not once, he said, in the whole rest of my life, and found to his enormous and permanent surprise that he meant every word of it and remembered exactly why. The end. We've reached the end of another sci-fi traveler story, friends. Do us a favor, hit the like button, leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you in the next episode.